Hello, everybody. I'm going to give folks just a minute to filter in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence Self-Care webinar. The topic for today is self-care in difficult times, healing for activists. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kelly Becker. Pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator. As we begin today's webinar, I'd like to start by sharing a few announcements with you. The webinar will last approximately an hour, and we hope that you'll join in and participate. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to type your questions and comments in the questions box, and we will do our best to address them several times throughout the presentation or at the end. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties with the audio on your computer, you may also listen in on your telephone by dialing the number in your registration email. This webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording within 24 hours. It will also be posted on our website in the members section. Please feel free to share this with others at your agency. And lastly, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a minute to complete the evaluation at the end of the webinar. It will be available in a window that will open up at the conclusion of the webinar, as well as in a follow-up email. I'm now going to hand it over to Erin Upchurch, the Executive Director of Kaleidoscope Youth Center in Columbus, Ohio.
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for having me on today. This is something that's really near and dear to my heart when we talk about self-care and wellness, and really just spending your days more than not feeling the most alive that you can and the most grounded in what you're doing. And this is from my own personal practice of living not that way and what that feels like. Just briefly, my background, I am a social worker celebrating 20 years this May. And I've worked with just about every population, but probably the most, what would be the one that made me actually start paying attention to my wellness was when I worked in community mental health at a 24/7 crisis mental health and substance use facility here in Columbus, NetCare, for those of you who may be familiar. And I remember one day talking to somebody about my job, and I remember saying like, oh, I'm so good in a crisis. And then I thought about it, and I thought, how long do I want to be good in crisis situations? How often do I want to be hyper vigilant and aware of every move that people are making, what they're saying, and you know, always thinking of the worst case scenario, because to be safe, that's really what we had to do. And then on top of that, as a practitioner, I was in private practice for a couple of years, and I do, prior to being at Kaleidoscope, I did quite a bit of advocacy and supportive work within the transgender and non-binary communities. And so hearing so many stories about others' experiences of trauma or harm or violence, it just, you know, it begins to wear on you because it began to wear on me in a way of like I wasn't being impacted by it. Which, you know, looking back now, I understand like this hardening that happens when you're in this kind of work and you're hearing stories and dealing with survivors. You do develop a shell. The question is always, how thick is that shell, and can you ever take it off or put it down? So in working there, and after declaring how great I was in a crisis, I thought, oh, this isn't where I want to be in my life. And so really started paying attention to my own wellness, getting myself involved in therapy, somatic work, some practices like yoga and polarity therapy, and just some different lenses through which to see the world, experience my work, and then most, I think importantly, being able to steward the impact of working in this world. And so this now has translated into a priority for me in lots of different ways, even here at Kaleidoscope. For those who are not familiar with Kaleidoscope Youth Center, we are the largest and longest standing organization in the state of Ohio to serve LGBTQIA+ youth and young adults. We serve ages 12 up to 24. We have a housing program and case management and a drop-in center, which is for 12 to 20-year-olds. And then we do trainings across the state, and we are the hub for the Ohio GSA network. And I have a really delightful team. They're just really fantastic people. And we center wellness at our work. That is the priority. So that could look like, you know, we do a meeting every Monday with all staff, and it takes up the majority of our day. But I believe there's something about building community with each other before we go out to build community with other people. You know, or we make sure we do a quarterly time when it's just for us. So just different things to support our team here so that we can stay well and keep doing this work. So what we're going to do for the next hour or up to an hour is I'm going to talk a bit about trauma stewardship and what that means and looks like. And then we're going to do a practice. I think it's really important to, there's different ways to heal, I guess, and grow and expand. You can do top down or bottom up, and I like both approaches. And so the top down, the bringing down is giving you the information and language. I think language for what we're experiencing is such an important thing. But then the bottom up is working with our nervous systems and just our systems overall and how we navigate the world. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes my mind is saying one thing and my body or heart are saying something else. And for me, the ultimate measure of integrity for myself is being in harmony inside. But that means I got to take care of myself so that I can hear and notice and be aware of what's happening. So I'll give it to you. We'll get this information a couple of ways, but I really want you to walk away with some things that you can do on your own or with a group of folks or a friend to begin to care for yourself in difficult times. So what I will invite you to do is listen. I also understand that some of you may drift off into a slight nap, perhaps if you're sitting somewhere comfortably or lying down, and I just want to say that's okay too. I want this hour to be one for you that's your focus on yourself and your wellness. And so with that, please get somewhere comfortable. If that means lying down or sitting up in a chair or something cozy on the floor, whatever position's comfortable for you, and you feel the most at ease where you are, please just take a moment and get there. And then the next thing I am going to invite you to do is utilizing the questions tab. I'd like to just do like a check-in word. So my question is, what are you noticing that you're feeling right now? Or is there a certain emotion that you're most aware of? And it's just one word. So if you're tired, that's a word. Exhausted, maybe you feel sick, maybe you're anxious, maybe you're happy, anything like that. So if you could go to the questions area and begin to send in your words, that would be wonderful. Great.
And Erin, are you able to see those come in, or do you need me to read them?
Yes.
Okay.
Cool. I'm going to read what's here so far and invite the rest of you to share your one word, please. So far, we've got drained, emotional, tired, drained, stagnant, relaxed, anxious, frustrated, tired, anxious, sad, just one more moment to see if anybody else would like to share. Impotent. Often when I do conversations centered on challenging topics, so that could be looking at race or minority groups or queer folks or anything that challenges our norm, our status quo, there's a space of resistance that often comes up. There's three kinds actually, and one can be the cognitive resistance and thinking that things aren't that bad, or there's no way that this is someone's experience, or it's no way I'm actually doing this. It's just really talking yourself out of acknowledging and being in the truth. The second one is an emotional resistance. So especially when it's like challenging what we know to be true or our experiences, it could come up as anger or anxiety or sadness or guilt or disbelief, pushing away, cynicism. And then the last one is the behavioral, and that's where it's like, well, there's just too much to do, so I'm not going to do anything, or it's too hard, or I've been doing this for so long, there's no way anybody else can understand. And I say that because as we start to talk about wellness and self-care, it is extremely common, and this may happen for things that come up in you like, oh, you don't have time for that, or oh, she doesn't understand. If she lived like I did, blah, 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 then she wouldn't be saying these things and whatnot. And so I just want to acknowledge that and validate that that is actually our system kind of freaking out because it's change, and like you're being invited to possibly do something new or more of what you've already been trying to do. And if those kind of thoughts come up, like just notice them. There's nothing you need to do about it. My biggest thing with that is like there's always an and in that process. And so maybe if someone's trying to tell me how to take better care of myself, I could be like, they don't even know my life or understand, and I probably could try just one thing different. Right. And so opening yourself up to acknowledging there might be something else that you could do. So with that, we've got two more that have been added, numb and excited. I'm excited too. And I feel a little bit of anxiety. So I'm here with you all. The first exercise I'm going to ask us to do is if you are in a space that feels comfortable or safe, to just close your eyes. If closing your eyes isn't working for you, just kind of soften your gaze a bit and look down at your nose, the tip of your nose. And just like softly look over the top. And I'm going to ask you to envision all of us standing in a circle. It looks like there's 34 people on, and just kind of see us standing in a circle. Don't worry, we're not holding hands. And in that circle, I like for you to see yourself placing your word in the center. So I'm going to read through these one more time. Drained, emotional, tired, drained, stagnant, relaxed, anxious, frustrated, tired, anxious, sad, impotent, numb, and excited. And just see those words just being in the center of the circle. And in this circle, let's see ourselves taking one step back, one collective step back. And then to take one more. And then notice that there's room for all of this. And there's nothing you need to do to take your word out of the circle or get rid of it or step on it or hide it. Like there's room for all that you all are showing up with today and every day. And you also get to create space in your own life so that there's room for this and then the and what else is there. And there's room here for all of us too, our stories and experiences. Now, if you could bring your attention back to the screen, I want to talk about trauma stewardship. Maybe. Let's try this again. All right. So I like this little image here. I love trees and I love the root system of trees and then how they just are and this exists. And trees are around for thousands and thousands of years and they're just a tree and they do their thing. They shed their leaves or their flowers or their fruit. They keep growing and their root system stays rooted. And what I really enjoy and appreciate about trees is this root system underneath, like in a forest, is how it's all connected. And
Karen, I'm not seeing your screen anymore.
oh no. Is that better? Can you see it now? It says people can see it.
Yes, I can see it now.
Great. So this is a tree and the roots and it being in deep and how in a forest, like the trees actually feed each other and rely on each other for growth and sustainability. And it's what's great about it is there's nothing one specific tree needs to do. Like it's all that interdependency and that connection. And that's what I love to think about community. And even while we're here together, but even in your places of work or in your own communities is building that root system so you always have something to tap into. Like that's the beauty of community is if one person is like a little low, there's other resource. Oh my, what is? Sorry, I'm working with the screen trying to advance it and it's.
Your screen has gone away again.
Yeah. So I'm trying to like advance. Oh, there we go. Okay, I think we got it. So wanted to just acknowledge and validate as helpers, givers, so much of our time is spent doing for others, doing something. You know, as a social worker, that is, we're taught to do more, to do for. I'm a parent. I've got a 16-year-old daughter. I've got an almost 18-year-old son. I work at a youth center. I have a partner. Like I've got all these different things and it's always so much doing and pouring out of ourselves. And so that's why self-care, it can't be about what we do. It needs to be who we are and how we are being and existing in the world. And I will be the first to say, like, I just painted my nails today. I love it. It's soothing. And so it's important to set aside time to rejuvenate in whatever way works best for you. There's also a space you can get into where all day most days or every moment you can be caring for yourself, whether it's taking a breath or stepping away from something. And just to reiterate, like, there is nothing selfish about caring for ourselves. Like, this is truly about survival. Audre Lorde, this is a popular quote of hers, but she says, self-care is not indulgence. Let me get the.
Erin, sorry to interrupt. Your screen's still not showing.
No?
No. There you go. Now I see it.
Thank you for saying something.
Yep.
I'm pulling up this quote that I want to. So she says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And that's Audre Lorde talking about self-care, and like, it is about survival and how we're making it through these days. My goodness, looks like sorry, y'all, looks like I have to stop sharing to be able to advance it, and that's really bizarre.
Megan, do you have any tips on that? I've never had that happen.
Sorry, I'm not sure either.
I'll just keep going. We know that we've been conditioned to be in everybody else's business. Like, that's our society, that's social media, that's Facebook, that's Instagram, that's everything. Something always has our attention. But I think it's important to think about ways we can talk about and demonstrate our love or caring for others without draining or getting from an empty well. I like to say it's pretty arrogant and presumptuous to assume that people want or need that much of us. That was something I had to learn as a social worker, that like, I can't save the world, I can't change the entire world, and I can't save people. But what I can do is show up for people, and I can change my own world that I live in. But also, I believe that people have just what they need on the inside. My role, I see as a practitioner, is to create that space for those skills and those resources to emerge and make sure they're resourced enough to do it. And it's definitely a different way of looking at things. What is this? Sorry, y'all. Kelly and I even practiced this before we got started, and it was fine. Okay. So trauma stewardship is the idea of what we do with our trauma. And so we know that trauma is a distressing or disturbing experience, or the effects of an experience, or the impact. Prolonged stress is the extended experience of feeling overwhelmed, scared, helpless, or angry. And so it's important just to take a moment and think about what this even looks like in your own life. We know about impact trauma, abuse trauma. Prolonged stress is like poverty and living in violence. All of that changes our brains in a way, especially for young people, in terms of how they are able to think and process information, but it impacts us as adults as well. But then, like, for my example, working in net care, like, I was living in prolonged stress, the extended experience of being in crisis, essentially, and being on edge and hypervigilance, like living in that every single day and doing just fine. So I ask you to just take a moment and think about the multiple stressors you encounter on a daily basis, just outside of work. So just getting up in the morning, driving to work, walking to work, biking, or if you're right now, most of us are probably working from home. And so is it the news that you're seeing, or whatever those stressors are? Often these occur before we even get out the door or get to this place where we're actually working. And then you can layer on what you experience at work. So trauma stewardship is the task of bearing witness to trauma without surrendering the ability to live fully and well. So again, the act or the task of bearing witness to trauma without surrendering the ability to live fully and well. And this is out of a book called Trauma Stewardship, which I highly, highly recommend. It's Trauma Stewardship, an everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others. And I just feel like every human should read it. When we are not good stewards of trauma, we then find ourselves in a trauma exposure response or trauma response. That's when our adaptive strategies appear. So thinking about, if you're familiar with working with folks who survived trauma, especially in a longer term capacity, there's always these behaviors that people will ascribe, which is a trauma response or PTSD or things that come up. And it is a response, and it's our system's way of trying to navigate the fear or threat, or trying to cope with whatever it is that we are having to cope with. So it's a transformation that takes place within us as a result of the exposure to the suffering of others. Simply, it's the ways in which the world looks and feels like a different place to you as a result of you doing your work. If we were in person, I would ask you all to, raise your hand if you see the world differently than when you first started working or doing the work that you're doing. Do you find yourself being more cynical, or maybe not trusting people? Or, as a social worker, my kids are always like, Mom, don't social work me, because I ask questions. Like, I have a daughter who loves to nap, and her grades dropped a little bit second quarter. And by dropped, she's like a straight A student, so she was down like a 3.75, which I know, whatever, because I have a son who's the opposite. But between her kind of sleeping and her grades dropping, and then like her just being 16 with like a mouth every now and then, I was like, are you okay? Something you need to talk about? Like asking those questions. She's like, I don't need a social worker. And she's right, she doesn't. But like, I'm trained to look at things in a really specific way from a mental health and mental wellness perspective. And so think about, if you're around certain types of stress or trauma or situations all the time, like your brain and your eyes are skewed towards that lens. And so the world will look different to you depending on what your work is. I think I figured out what's happening. There we go. It is our responsibility to acknowledge the effects of trauma exposure within ourselves. And so that's where I say, looking inward, and it's not selfish to know what's happening inside of yourself. And so we have to learn to make room for our own internal processing and creating space within to heal and discover what is needed to continue with clarity. And so in this go, go, go world, it can be really challenging, even from moment to moment, to pause before answering or taking a phone call or a text message or just responding to something. So I know that even more fitting in a 20-minute yoga class or, meditation, 10-minute meditation or whatever it is, to slow us down and put us at rest, I know that it's hard. And it can be a challenge. And so when we're talking about creating space, this is thinking about different ways that you can have space for yourself to process what's happening on the inside, whether it's just like acknowledging it and thinking about it, finding someone else to talk to, or whatever it is that you do to care for yourself. Because the question is, how do you know in this room and this space has not been created, is not big enough, or is not being used? And for most of us, a lot of us, that can be what we call burnout or compassion fatigue. I know when I am not getting enough sleep or otherwise caring for myself, like I just get really crabby. And I always joke with my team that I'm just a crabby older social worker, because I am. And there's plenty to be crabby about, but like, it's a different kind of crabbiness and grumpiness where it's just like, forget everybody. I don't, there's nothing possible. Why am I even here? Like I start to ask those kind of big questions. So here are some warning signs, if you will, of trauma exposure response. So take a moment and look through those. And these are things that pop up when we know that we are heading into our trauma exposure response, that we're not necessarily stewarding our experiences the way that are productive, or we might be deep, deep in it. And I'd be curious to know, if you want to put in your questions, if any of these stand out to anyone. So we've got, helpless, hopeless, a sense that you can't do enough, So this is kind of like in those beginning areas of like resistance in our systems, the problem's too big, I can't do enough, I can't help everyone, which is the truth, and that's a matter of fact statement. But there's a difference between saying that and knowing it and feeling it and having it draining you. Hypervigilance, diminished creativity, the minimizing, oh, it's no big deal, oh, it'll be fine, I don't need sleep anyway. Sense of persecution, I think, can be a big one because could be feeling like nobody understands you or they're out to get you or trying to harm you. Numbing, grandiosity, anger about things working the way intended. Yeah, I completely get that. So the grandiosity, I have found very interesting. This inflated sense of the importance related to one's work. So if you ever, maybe you're this person, but what this looks like at work is, oh my God, I feel so sick and I can barely breathe and I'm exhausted, but I've got to go in today because there's this meeting. Or I've got to go in because I've got to finish this and there's no one else that can do it but me. So it's like this overwhelming sense of responsibility, but it actually is a sense of grandiosity of like, nobody else can do it but me. I must be there, right? The anger and cynicism is also real. And given the work, that you all are doing, like anger absolutely makes sense. You can't live in this world. Like James, who was that? There is this quote about like, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. It's like a feminist quote, but like, I don't know how anybody lives in this world not feeling angry about things. The important piece is, as I mentioned about these 3 types of resistance, is not to sit there with it. Anger is, we're supposed to be angry. It's actually a really great emotion. It's very normal, natural, typical, but it's supposed to move us to action. And I think for a lot of folks, when we feel angry about something or mad, like we get stuck in that and then we numb ourselves to it because we feel like we shouldn't be experiencing that as an emotion. When in all actuality, that sense of being perturbed or agitated is a call or invitation to do something, to take a step. So that goes back to that and that we discussed at the beginning. I see, so you're saying that most of these relate to you. The biggest one, well, not the biggest, but one for me that can be really big is the inability to embrace complexity. When I am overwhelmed with a lot of things going on and things aren't making sense, I really struggle to like get it. And so people can explain things multiple times. And if there's some kind of confusion that makes it complex, like I actually like get frustrated. And the more frustrated I get, the more I get into this like sense of confusion. So it's a vicious cycle for me. And that's when I know like, oh, I need to like take a nap, or I need to, take some time off or do something that's missing that helps me be at a place of rest. Addictions, we know, come in many, many forms. It's not just substance use, and it is substance use. And an addiction is something that like you essentially can't say no to, or you can't stop or turn away from or moderate. Typically when we talk about addictions, it's usually focused on drugs and alcohol and food. That can all be there, but it also can, be video games and TV or social media. There's a lot of different types of addictions, and really what addictions do for us, they start out as a numbing. They start out as a tactic of avoidance or coping, if you will. So there's like self-care and coping. Coping is doing something in the moment to experience immediate relief as a form of self-soothing. And typically with addictions, we start out in self-soothing with whatever the vice is, and then it's so good and we don't have any other tools that we become addicted and reliant upon those. So I'm going to pause here to see if there's any other questions or thoughts that are coming up for folks as you look at these different types of responses or warning signs. I see a couple of folks saying they experience pretty much everything. Going back to trauma stewardship. Trauma stewardship, there it is, the task of bearing witness to trauma without surrendering the ability to live fully and well. I can also share this presentation with Kelly afterwards if anybody would like. If you want to take a screenshot now, you can, but I also can share so that you can look at it afterwards. Any other thoughts or questions about trauma stewardship? It's kind of a higher level overview of it, or trauma exposure response. So even though meaningful self-care may not prevent the experience of your trauma response, it allows us to acknowledge it and act accordingly. And so again, back to that minimizing and no, I'm fine, I don't need sleep, or I'm okay, or it's no big deal, or I don't know why I get mad. The shoulding of ourselves, like shouldn't feel this way, shouldn't respond this way, it shouldn't mean this much. Like we don't have to do that. And we don't have to let our inner critic talk to us in that way. And what trauma stewardship means for me is really an invitation to finding rest. Being at rest in a way that will slow me down enough to check in and really determine how I'm feeling. And I cannot do that if I'm going. Being at rest, so being a good steward of our trauma, being at a place of rest allows us to attune to what's called your felt sense. So, which tells us where we are and how we're doing. And so felt sense is literally like how you're feeling within your body. It's your intuition, that gut feeling, that internal sense of like, you're just not okay, or, you know, you're just on edge. Yesterday I was very grumpy at home and I just was, and there's a felt sense. And so, but you can only do that if you're attuned to yourself and not everybody else to even understand that or begin to feel into that. Any questions at this point? Where are we at? Something that I have found as like, I have on here the secret. Something that I have found and really was the beginning of my own discovery of like, how do I find rest within myself? How do I begin to live in a space that I can steward the impact of the world essentially and those experiences, is having a knowledge of my own life and the things that I value, what I feel, and what I need to take care of myself. You know, and so it's asking yourself these questions like, who are you? What's your story? What's important to you? And a really big question is, what makes you feel alive? And I would almost add, another question. This is new for me to be kind of meditating on and responding to is this sustainable? And there's work that I do that I find very draining and boring. This is actually a question we ask when we interview people, like a list of things that make them feel bold, confident, excited, alive, and then a list of things that make them feel drained, bored, insecure, lacks confidence, just to see like what certain tasks do. But this can also be a bigger picture for your own life, and whether it's your job or your hobby or people you're spending time with, maybe a relationship, it could be a lot of different things. But like, what is important to you and like what makes you feel the most alive? And the actual goal here is to feel the most alive you can each day. And some days that may be a little less or more, but like connecting to your life in that way, like that's your care, that's your self-care, because then your decisions are guided by that felt sense of aliveness. And then is it sustainable? Is what you're doing to feel the most alive, is that sustainable? Do you even, and if it's not, do you really feel alive with it? I'm reading a question. Yes. So the comment is, when our caseloads are high and our grants jobs are dependent upon productivity, it feels like self-care is unimportant to our directors. Of course it does. And I not being your director, but being a director role a few different times, people just want stuff done. So, right, so let's acknowledge this culture of productivity, this culture of doing more all the time. And it's finding this balance between responding to the urgency of what's happening and slowing down enough just to take the pause. And it is hard. And I've been in case management, and I've even had to do productivity in terms of documentation, meeting with clients and families, and running an organization. And so that's why it's getting into like, what are you doing on the inside? What are you doing before you're going to work? What are some things you're doing throughout the day? Which I'm going to show you a couple of suggestions here in a moment. How can you show up and care for yourself on the inside? Can you sit in your car for a bit before you come into the office or go into somewhere? And then I'll get to another screen with some other suggestions. I think what also can be important is something that I've really appreciate having this skill set is, and again, I acknowledge I'm in a position to do this, but I have to ask myself, like, do I need to be the one doing this, or is there somebody else that can be here doing this with me or instead of me? And that's not in like a form of like delegation or getting rid of work. It's just truly like, is there another way to do this? Is there somebody else that can, is there a way I can be supported, and asking for what I need? And so for the person that says it feels like the directors don't care, what I would wonder is what conversations around rest or caring for yourself or wellness have been had with your directors or upper management. Because if they don't know, they may not be able to adjust or do anything different. The next step in this, so we've got the what makes you feel alive, and then and getting to rest is like just acknowledging how hard you're working and what you're doing. This work is difficult, and I don't know about you, but if I had a penny for every time someone said I can never do what you do, I would truly be a lot wealthier. And people say that to us to make us feel like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, but like, no, it's hard work. And being gentle with yourself, being gentle with taking time off or resting or sitting or whatever it is that you need to do, gentle with yourself when you make a mistake, and finding the strength in your story. Back to that, who are you? What do you care about? Being patient. So our culture has this feeling of urgency and attraction to a quick fix, which can also actually be a part of our trauma response. And so understand, like I was just talking about, the urgency of a situation versus like, let's just sit with this. We have started our housing program last year, and our housing program manager is definitely a go, go, go kind of person. Let's fix this, let's get it done, let's cross things off the list. Like that's who she is. And I'm typically not. And I actually had to say to her one time, like, I'm not going to be responding to this in a way that feels comfortable, because I'm going to take my time. And she was like, okay, because I knew she wanted a response and an answer right away, and I needed to sit with what that was going to be with that question for a bit. And so it's actually, taking that risk to slow down and take a breath or pause, and then cultivating compassion for yourself and others. Believe it or not, I am much happier and I feel much more alive, and it is so much more sustainable when I believe that others are doing the best that they can do. And when I'm not in that space, then everything agitates me, and I'm, back to that being persecuted sometimes, like, why is everyone doing this to me? Or just being really, it takes a lot of energy to be annoyed and angry and upset all the time. So having compassion for others and for yourself is something else that's really important. Then being present and like remembering to breathe. So until we can even slow down to assess how we're doing in our current state, we don't even know what we need. So getting back to that felt sense, it tells you where you are and how you feel in the moment. If you just stop for just, a 5-second things, you can maybe notice that your heart is beating faster than it was before you entered the room. So, and we become attached to the outside and outcomes. it doesn't allow us to be present. And doesn't allow us to bring our awareness within because we're so focused on what's happening outside. And being attached to outcomes is tricky because we also don't have a lot of control. So another space of care for myself is being clear about the outcomes and what I can do. And so, you know, as a social worker and working with people who are severely, had severe and persistent mental illness, it was typically the folks that are on the streets that society wants to drive past and not look at. People that don't smell great or look great and all of that. And if I were attached to outcomes in that work, I would have been a wreck because the outcomes, like, they don't come, the ones that we want for people, and the systems are challenging to navigate. And so I had to make an outcome for myself is that I could look at each client that I worked with in the eye and hold their dignity. And like, to me, that was my way of being present, and it was an outcome I could control. And I could see them, and I knew they were seen that day, even if it was just for a moment. And so being willing to introduce new habits or new ideas or new definitions of the work that you're doing is actually a practice. And it's not like reframing in the way of like bypassing the truth or lying to yourself or minimizing. It's being really clear and honest about what you're being asked to do when you show up. About 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do here, like I said, I'll send you all this in a PDF. But there's some different things that you could do. I do want to have time to take you through a body awareness thing. But here's an example is writing down one thing you'd love to incorporate into your day and then start to do that at least once a week. And so if you are busy and going and high caseloads and all that, maybe one thing you want to do is step outside in the middle of the day. I used to work third shift, and my thing was when the sun came up every morning, I would actually go outside just to feel the fresh air with the sun rising and hear the birds. And it just became this really beautiful experience that I eventually was able to make it into an almost daily practice. But one thing you want to incorporate into your day, it could really be anything. And then try just once a week and then maybe twice, and moving it up as it feels right and feels doable. And maybe even having somebody that you can do this with to hold you accountable and to offer support. Another thing is breathing. Like we breathe, but typically our breath is fast. And so practicing conscious breathing is, you know, here it says commit to taking a walk or standing outside or sitting quietly for 5 minutes every hour that you're working, just to breathe and take notice of things around you. I like to encourage my team to do their calendars like at like 80%. So they've got, you know, the 20% of white space basically where they're not doing anything. I have thinking time scheduled for myself, which was a challenge to get to. And I've been working for 20 years, so it's taken me 20 years to even get here. But I've got a do not schedule time on my calendar, which means I can schedule things if I'd like to, but no one else can. And just that sense of autonomy and being in control of my calendar feels great. And then I can be super intentional about what I'm scheduling there. But about a month ago, I took myself to lunch. It was after something, I don't know what. And I was just eating and daydreaming and thinking. And it was a really beautiful thing. And I tend to be a dreamer in general. But that's what conscious breathing is being mindful of your breath at the time and just doing it. Because we know it's an automatic thing, function of our bodies. And then this idea of gratitude. So again, these are all things that you're practicing on the inside that you actually, I mean, I hate to say you don't have to stop for very long, but it's helpful to stop. But thinking of things like the beginning and end of your day around like a moment for which you're grateful, top 3 things you enjoyed about your day, or maybe with a partner or a friend or someone you're talking to, have that conversation even in a week. But cultivating gratitude is actually a really great practice because it allows you to stay present, and you kind of have to search. And sometimes the gratitude is I made it through the day. And there's more to life than just making it through each day, right? And so you figure out what it is that you can be grateful for. The other things I've listed here, these are out of my own personal practice, is meditation, yoga, use of essential oils, and nutrition. Meditation, I know it can scare people away. I like to call it sitting in silence or just sitting. If I'm with a group, I'll call it collective silence. But it's, again, just having the moments where you are just in your body, sitting with yourself. I tell you, there's quite the discovery when that happens. But you don't need to worry about doing anything. Like, thoughts will come, and that's okay. There's no realistic expectation that you don't have other thoughts during your time of sitting. And then there's scientific evidence that it does help our brains and our nervous systems and our cardiovascular systems and all these different things. Yoga is similar. It's like a moving meditation, but being in your body and having to breathe through a pose that might be challenging or difficult, or you just don't feel like it, or standing in a power pose. For those familiar with yoga, you can look this up too, but there's also pictures for chair yoga. But I love warrior pose and mountain pose. Warrior pose makes you feel so strong. And even mountain pose, there's something about standing with your shoulders back and looking onto the horizon and like being grounded that, like, for me, I feel extremely powerful. And so before I have to like maybe go speak, or if I'm feeling nervous or anxious, I will take a power pose before doing so. Let's see. Yeah, there's a slide in here about yoga for stress. So it's got a couple of different poses that you can do, but then there's also chair yoga where you can do, and there's a link to find those poses as well to be as accessible as possible. Aromatherapy, I will just say this, essential oils. I just used a little lavender before we got on today. What I will say to you is I'm not a doctor, so please make sure you're consulting with your healthcare professional or aromatherapist before looking at a use of oils if you haven't, because there can be lots of contraindications. But essential oils are from a flower, the leaves, the root, and there's a lot of reports of improved symptoms, behavior, feelings of ease when people utilize them. And then I just got a list of some of my favorite ones. Patchouli is my absolute favorite. And I like frankincense. And then the last thing to just kind of know in terms of caring for yourself is around food. And this is not about shaming in any capacity. This is about eating things that make you feel good, period. It's that type of intuitive eating. And I also want to acknowledge, I know that can be like a place of privilege to have food and drink that make you feel good. And so even if it's just one thing every now and then, or if you're just nourishing your body, like, that's okay. It's okay. And if you really want to be tapped into your highest self, and I can't say that I live here that often, is when I'm eating, I will ask, like, how does this nourish my life? It's not a common thing that I ask myself, but it definitely is something to think about. So for instance, like, I am vegetarian, and that's because I feel better. I have more energy. I don't want to take another life to feed my own life. Like, that's, for me, that's what works, and it makes me feel my best. But I would never expect somebody else to do that to feel their best. All right. This last piece is just about the culture of self-care and cultivating that in your environment, your work environment, your home. Like I said, your relationships, you can have that culture, but it's being really clear about how you want things to be. And like I said here at Kaleidoscope, we certainly like prioritize wellness. And so with our unlimited PTO, that means, for me, that was important so that people could take time off without being worried about like utilizing it all, or people coming to work sick because they were saving their hours for vacation and whatnot. So that's an example. I think too often organizations and agencies or businesses tell people to take care of themselves, but we don't create environments that do the same. And so finding different ways to do that, I think, is really important. So I'm going to stop there. It's 2:54. And I want to leave space for any questions or comments. And if there are none, I'll do a quick breath awareness and then I will be done. All right, I'm not seeing any. So any recommendations for from a system level, how to help advocate for staff and employees? Sure. I think in terms of advocating, I'm going to make an assumption that maybe you're in a position of leadership for the person who asked that question, or if it's just like within your group. I think just having the conversation is a really great place to start. And so it's finding somebody in leadership who you feel comfortable talking to, or getting people together to present something to leadership. Like, we want to prioritize our wellness, and here are some things we think would be helpful. And coming with suggestions for sure. I think any good employer, especially those in the social service field, like, we know the importance of our people being taken care of. It's just, how does that happen? And sometimes it's done through like benefits and having really good benefits, or providing lunch, like some of those basic human needs. But to get on a deeper level, it can be around taking breaks. Making sure that folks have the time off they need when that makes the most sense, whether it's building community with your team. So I think there could be a lot of different things on this system level, but the biggest and the most important thing is to start having that conversation with people who can help make those decisions. Sure. And the things that, I offered around like the gratitude or the breath, or doing one thing you've been wanting to do, like, you can do that on your own without permission from anyone else. Like, I like to think of like micro movements, and so doing the smallest thing you can do. And so maybe it's bringing, it's in my car right now, but I have these two self-care animals that I have in my office. One is a unicorn and one is a zebra with sequins that you can, like, the ones you can move up and down. Like, I loved the zebra, and so I brought it into my office, and it was one thing that I could do to just have in there. It made me happy. And I also, from a sensory perspective, will play with the sequins every now and then. And so it's really thinking all the way down to doing the smallest thing that can add a little more aliveness, a little more joy, a little more space of rest into your day. All right, so we're gonna do about a 1 minute, 1.5 minute breath awareness meditation, because it's something you can practice on your own. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, again, if you're not in a comfortable position, to go ahead and get in that, and just notice your breath. And again, you may close your eyes if that is safe and makes sense for you, or look out the window, or look at something, or just down at the tip of your nose. And just start breathing and notice your natural breath. How there's nothing you need to do. It's just happening. Notice the air going through your nostrils. Coming out, or in and out through your mouth. Place your hands on your belly. Just notice your belly and keep breathing. And as you're breathing with your hands on your belly, notice the way your hands rise and fall as you're breathing. If you're lying down. And if you're sitting, notice how your hands go out a bit as you inhale and exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Notice that pace. And if your thoughts start to come in, notice your thoughts, and then bring your attention back to your hands on your belly. And notice how it rises and falls, expands, or deflates. Inhale, exhale. And you can now begin to wiggle your toes a bit if you can, or your fingers. If you're sitting up, maybe roll your shoulders back. Keep breathing. And then take a strong inhale and then exhale. Do that again. And then exhale. And just start to bring your awareness back into the room. Thank you all very much for your attention this hour and for your practice and for being open to hearing and possibly trying something new. And thank you for the work that you're doing. It's necessary, you're necessary, and you get to take care of yourself in that necessity. That is all I have for now. Still can be available for any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was wonderful. We really appreciate your willingness to do this for our folks. Everyone, feel free to ask any more questions if you have them. If not, please remember to fill out your evaluation as you leave, or you can click the link that's sent to you in your email as well. And it looks like a lot of people have popped off. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, but I just again wanted to tell you thank you so much. That was wonderful and we greatly appreciate it. Sorry again about the technology glitch, but you did wonderful.
It worked out. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Take care.